March 1958, Sallisaw, Oklahoma. The county truck came up Calvin Decker's drive at 9:17 in the morning. Two men got out with a clipboard. They took the John Deere tractor first, hitched it to the flatbed without asking and without speaking above what was necessary. Then the hay rake, then the two-bottom plow. Then they worked the north pasture gate open and backed the cattle trailer in and began loading the herd. Calvin stood in the barn doorway and watched. He had 4 toes missing from Korea and a bullet scar across his right shoulder that ached every cold morning. This morning was cold. There was nothing useful to do with your hands when the papers were in order. At the gate on the gravel shoulder of Highway 64, a battered truck had pulled off the road and stopped. Engine idling, a man in a canvas work jacket and a tan Stetson sat with a folded road map on the seat beside him. He was watching the county truck work the pasture. He had been watching since before the tractor came out. He had not moved. Nobody at the farm had seen him. When the last head was loaded and the trailer latch dropped into place, the county truck pulled down the drive and turned east toward Sallisaw. The tractor trailed behind it on the flatbed. The north pasture was empty. The grass bent where the cattle had been standing. The man on the shoulder set his map on the dash. He watched Calvin Decker turn and walk back into the barn alone. He sat there a long time after the county truck was gone. Here is the story of that farm and the man who was at the gate that morning. Calvin Decker was 32 years old. His father had filed on the 210 acres in 1921 when Oklahoma was still young enough that a man with a straight back and a filing fee could pull something real out of the ground. Calvin was born in the farmhouse. He learned to plow behind a mule. He took the place over in 1951 and had been working it the way his father worked it before him. From the top of the ledger, steadily, until the ledger got lighter. He had come back to Sallisaw from Korea in February of that year. Korea, November and December 1950. The Chosin Reservoir. The Chinese People's Volunteer Army surrounded the 7th Infantry Division in the night. 10 divisions against 1. The temperature fell to 30 degrees below zero. Frostbite took fingers before the enemy took men. The regiment fought its way 17 miles out through the mountains and carried its dead because not one of those men was being left behind. Calvin Decker walked out of Chosin on December 13, 1950, with 4 toes on his left foot and a bullet track across his right shoulder that a field surgeon had cleaned with a knife in the dark. He did not talk about it when he got home. He put his work clothes on the next morning and went out to the fence line. He married Dorothy Crane in 1952. They had 2 boys, Raymond and Carl. He ran 80 head on the upland pasture and paid the banknote the way a man pays a banknote when he means it, every month a little at a time until the number got smaller. Then in the fall of 1956, the beef market dropped. Not dipped, dropped the way a heavy thing drops when the rope goes all at once. Calvin held on through the winter on savings, through 1957 on credit. By January 1958, the credit was spent. The note on the farm was $4,200. County back taxes came to another $880. Total, $5,080. He went to the First Citizens Bank in February and asked Arthur Poole for an extension. Poole gave him 90 days and said it with the tone of a man keeping score. The 90 days ended the second week of March. Poole did not come out himself. When the barn door was between Calvin and the empty pasture, he sat down on an upturned feed bucket and put his hands flat on his knees. The shoulder ached. It always ached when the cold came in. He had not noticed the notice until he turned around. One of the county men had nailed it to the inside of the barn door before they left. A paper from the Sequoyah County court. It said the property owner had until Friday, March 14th to satisfy the remaining balance in full or vacate the premises. Today was Tuesday. Calvin read it once. He pulled the nail out and folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket. He sat back down. Dorothy was in the kitchen window. She had watched the whole thing. Raymond, 6 years old, had run to the porch rail when the trailer drove in and asked what the men were doing. Dorothy had brought him inside and told him to help with breakfast. He had not stopped watching through the screen door. Calvin was still in the barn when he heard boots on gravel. He came out into the cold light. A man was coming up the drive from the open gate. Large, steady in his walk, canvas jacket, tan Stetson set back on his head. Calvin met him in the yard. He looked at the face, and the face was working its way through. He was too tired to run it down fast. "Mister, I appreciate it, but I don't need a story written about me." "I don't write stories," the man said. "Then what do you want?" He looked back at the gate, at the section of highway shoulder where the truck had been parked 2 hours earlier. Then he looked at Calvin. "I was at the road this morning. I was there the whole time." Calvin went still. The man sat down on the bottom porch step uninvited, the way a man sits when he is staying a moment and not making a ceremony of it. Calvin stood in the yard and didn't ask him to move. "Korea," the man said. Calvin's jaw tightened. "How'd you know that? Your left foot, the way you carry it, and the shoulder." He nodded at it briefly. "Mine's the lung, different war." A long pause. The wind moved through the empty pasture behind them. "Chosin," the man said. Calvin looked at him. "Yes." He nodded slowly. He looked at the empty pasture for a moment. The fence posts were still standing. The wire was still taut. There was just nothing inside of it anymore. "What's the number?" Calvin shook his head. "The number, all of it. Bank and county together. The way he said it had no ceremony in it. The way a man asks for a measurement before he cuts." Calvin looked at his boots. $5,080. Give or take what Poole adds by Friday. He stood, put his hat on. He walked back down the drive without another word and got in his truck. Calvin watched him go. He didn't know where the truck was headed. He didn't know if it was coming back. He went inside and didn't tell Dorothy. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Drop your state in the comments. I want to know how far this reaches. The First Citizens Bank of Sallisaw sat on Cherokee Street, 2 blocks from the courthouse. Low brick, glass door, small parking lot. Arthur Poole's office was in the back behind frosted glass. He walked in at 1:30 in the afternoon. The 2 tellers at the windows looked up. One placed the face in 5 seconds. The other took 10. Neither said anything. He walked past both of them and knocked once on Poole's door and opened it. Arthur Poole was a careful man of 50, with the kind of face that had learned early to give away nothing. He looked up. He placed the face. He showed nothing. "What can I do for you?" "Calvin Decker, farm on 64. Your people were out there this morning. That account is in formal default. What is the full balance including the county?" $5,080 plus late penalties by. He put the envelope on the desk, pushed it across. That is $5,500. The difference covers the equipment and the cost of turning the truck around today. Poole looked at the envelope. He did not touch it. "Mr. Wayne, this seizure was processed through the county court this morning. Reversing that requires authorization from call the judge. The judge's office doesn't open until. Then call him at home, Mr. Wayne." Poole said it carefully, with the precision of a man who has thought through the next sentence. "War record doesn't pay a note. That is the law of this county." He said it expecting it to land. It did not land the way he expected. The man across the desk said quietly, "No, it does not. That is the problem we are here to solve." He tapped the envelope once with 2 fingers and did not look away from Poole. "Count it, write the receipt, then call the judge." In that order. Outside the frosted glass, the teller room had gone silent. Neither woman was pretending to work. A customer at the far window had not moved in 2 minutes. Poole looked at him for a long moment. Then he opened the envelope. He counted it once. He counted it again. The second time his hands were steadier than the first. He wrote the receipt on bank letterhead. Account of Calvin T. Decker, paid in full. Equipment seizure of this date to be reversed. Note discharged. He dated it March 11th, 1958. He pressed the bank seal into the bottom of the page and signed under it. He slid it across the desk and picked up the telephone. The call to the county court lasted 4 minutes. Both tellers heard every word through the glass. The cattle truck was radioed on the highway east of town and told to turn around. The receipt went into the man's shirt pocket. He stood, hat on. One more thing. Calvin Decker's name is the only name attached to that land. I would like it to stay that way, Poole said. Of course. He walked out through the teller room. One of the women said his name as he passed, almost involuntarily. He lifted 2 fingers off the brim of his hat and walked out onto Cherokee Street. He turned back onto 64 headed west at 2:15. Dorothy Decker came to the door with flour on her hands. She looked at the man on her porch. She looked again. He took his hat off. Is Calvin in? Calvin came to the doorway. He looked at the man standing at his door and at the folded paper in the man's hand. He took it, unfolded it, read it. Note discharged, equipment seizure of this date to be reversed. His face changed, not with relief. Something harder. The face of a man who has held his spine straight through every moment of that day and is not going to stop now. He looked up. I didn't crawl out of Korea to have a stranger buy my farm out from under a bank, he said it quietly. Not angry, worse than angry. The specific pride of a man who knows exactly what he survived and what that survival cost. The man on the steps looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, No. You crawled out of Korea so men like Arthur Poole could sleep warm and run their banks and send trucks out on Tuesday mornings without losing 1 hour of sleep over it. This is not charity, Calvin. You already paid. You just didn't get to keep what you earned. This is a correction, that is all it is. Quiet on the porch. Inside, Raymond had come to the screen door. His hand was flat against the mesh. Calvin looked at the receipt. He looked at the man on the steps. He put his hand out. They shook. The man nodded once to Dorothy. He put his hat on. He walked back down the drive and turned east on 64 without stopping. The county truck came back up the drive at 4:15. Raymond heard the engine before anyone else, and he was off the porch and across the yard at a dead run before Calvin got to the gate. The driver backed the trailer to the pasture gate and unlatched the rear without saying much. He'd been radioed on the highway and told to turn around is all he knew. The cattle came down the ramp one at a time. Raymond Decker stood at the gate and counted them as they went through. Out loud, the way a boy counts something he was afraid he would not see again. He got to 32 and looked at his father. They're all here, Pop? Calvin put his hand on top of his son's head and didn't say anything for a moment. He latched the gate when the last one was through. Dorothy came out and stood beside him. Raymond climbed to the top rail of the gate and counted them again. He counted them 3 times. He kept counting until it was too dark to see clearly across the pasture. Calvin Decker paid his notes on time for every year that followed. He rebuilt the herd to 90 head by 1963 and never carried a debt past harvest again. He did not speak publicly about March 11th, 1958. Dorothy knew. Raymond understood when he was old enough. Carl found out the way second sons always find things out, by listening when the adults believed he wasn't. Calvin farmed the 210 acres until 1979 and turned it over to Raymond and moved into the small house on the south edge of the property. He died in 1984 at 58. The shoulder ached every winter until the last one. In the nightstand drawer beside his bed, his family found 2 things: a Purple Heart citation folded in its original government envelope, ink faded to brown at the edges, and the bank receipt from First Citizens of Salisaw. March 11, 1958. Account of Calvin T. Decker, paid in full. The bank seal pressed in blue ink, soft with age but still clear. He had put them there together, no one knows when. No one ever asked him why he kept them side by side. And there is no one left who could answer, but they were there. The citation and the receipt, the debt the country owed him, and the day a man in a tan Stetson drove up Highway 64 and paid a piece of it without being asked. Raymond had the receipt framed. It hangs in the farmhouse now on the wall beside the kitchen door, next to a photograph Dorothy took that evening from the porch. It shows the north pasture in the last of the afternoon light. The cattle are through the gate. Raymond is on the top rail, 7 years old, his hand resting on a fence post. She wrote on the back of the photograph in 1985, the year after Calvin died. 4 words. He came back too. She meant the cattle. The family has always said she meant the cattle. The farm is still there, 210 acres. The same gate posts Calvin's father sank in 1921. The mailbox is the same dented tin box with the same faded numbers that were there on the morning of March 11th, when a truck pulled onto the shoulder and idled, and a man in a canvas jacket watched and decided something. Every third Tuesday in March, Raymond Decker drives out to the north pasture in the morning and checks the fence and counts the cattle. He has done it every year since Calvin died. His son asked him once why that specific morning. Raymond looked at the pasture for a moment. "It's the day," he said. "That's all. It's just the day." If this story reached you tonight, share it with a veteran in your life, or with anyone who still believes that some debts are real things, and that every now and then, when a debt has gone too long unpaid, a man in a tan Stetson shows up on a Tuesday morning and settles it quietly and drives away before anyone can argue. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more stories coming, because some men lived by a code they never wrote down, never explained, and never asked credit for. And the least we can do is remember them.